Hello, this is Dale Wetzel. Welcome to our show. This is the Legislature Today. We're coming to you from the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, North Dakota. And tonight it is something called Teeny Tuesdays. And this is a promotion at the Peacock Alley, and it's 2-for-1 martinis. And I don't even have to look at the board when I'm coming in because everyone has martini glasses on their table, and it reminds me of what the special is. In any case, this is a wonderful place to have a drink or have a nice meal, and we would encourage you to come down if you're driving around in Bismarck or even if you're just walking. We're going to be exploring two issues tonight in the first hour of our show. One of them is the use of drones by law enforcement, those unmanned flying machines that we see occasionally floating around in the sky, whether or not you should need a warrant to whether or not a police agency should need a warrant in order to use a drone to surveil the citizens. We will also be speaking about a completely different subject, Governor Jack Dalrymple's education finance bill, which is a very expensive and very complicated piece of legislation that the two Senate committees went through this morning. Just to recap a bit of what happened at the legislature today, one of them was the hearing on the governor's education finance bill held by the Senate Education and Finance and Tax Committees. The bill has a number of elements. It includes money for reduction of property taxes. It increases state aid to schools. Eventually, schools will be getting more than about $9,000 per student in aid. That's a considerable increase. The goal is to reduce property taxes and have the state pay about 80% of the instructional costs of school districts. We also had a couple of hearings on abortion bills. One of the bills would not permit abortions for sex selection or genetic abnormalities. Another would ban abortions if a fetal heartbeat is detected, and that is, according to experts, about 6 weeks into the pregnancy. There was resistance to both bills, and especially the second one, the heartbeat bill, because there was an argument that a woman could not know that she was pregnant before she would be ineligible to have an abortion. There was a hearing on a constitutional amendment aimed at cutting off government aid to private businesses and ending property tax exemptions. This was prompted by a North Dakota Supreme Court ruling last year in a Minot case that upheld Minot subsidies for private businesses. The key mover behind this amendment is Curly Haugland, who is a Republican national committeeman and a longtime Bismarck businessman and critic of government subsidies for business. He believes that this amendment will force the courts to re-examine their early interpretations of provisions that are already in the state constitution that say that the government shouldn't provide money to private people except for reasonable support for the poor. We're going to get right away about drones. We have here with us Representative Rick Becker. He is a Republican from Bismarck, the newly formed District 7 in the city of Minot. He's a plastic surgeon is his profession, and he has a bill that would require law enforcement to get a warrant in most circumstances before they could use a unmanned flying system or drone to surveil citizens. We also have with us Senator Carolyn Nelson. She's a Democrat from Fargo and a former member of the North Dakota House. She is on the Senate Judiciary Committee, which spent some time going over this bill this morning, or excuse me, this afternoon. It was supposed to be this morning, but the hearing was delayed. Representative Becker, could you please just tell us what does this bill do and why did you think it was necessary?
Well, it was brought to me by a constituent, not the bill, but the concept. And actually, the constituent just asked what I thought about a couple of issues. One of those was drones. And I had told the constituent, I've been... It just sort of moved on from there. It actually didn't have anything to do with that incident in Nelson County a while back, but that was just coincidental. So the bill makes it, intends to make it so that if law enforcement wants to do surveillance on a private citizen, that they first need to get a search warrant.
What Representative Becker was referring to earlier about the incident in Nelson County has to do with law enforcement use of a drone from the Grand Forks Air Force Base to check out the locations of a family on their ranch to make sure that where their locations were, because it was afraid, the law enforcement folks were afraid that the family was armed, and they wanted to, it was part of a dispute over cattle. Law enforcement was afraid that the family was armed, and they didn't want to come onto their property without knowing their locations. And they used a drone to find out the locations of these folks, who were subsequently arrested and charged. It was, according to a number of reports, the first time that folks had been arrested with information from a drone in the United States, and so it's a fairly significant national case. Senator Nelson, what was your, after you listened to all the evidence here, or at least as it was presented today, what was your impression of the need for this legislation?
Well, I think somewhere down the line we may need to have this, but I think first of all, the idea of having a study, we don't have a problem right now. We don't have unmanned aerial surveillance going on. There are a number of things for protections in this bill, which I agree with. But I think that it's kind of a solution looking for a problem again. But one of the biggest things is, number one, the privacy protection is already taken care of. We have protection from the Supreme Court for the last 99 years from several lawsuits, and it's called the exclusionary rule. And so part of the thing that people were looking at with their First and Fourth Amendment rights is covered already. Yes, I think if you're going after somebody, you need to have a warrant. But there are other things, and they are covered in the bill. There are things, and how might these be used? They might be used for border patrols. They might be used for an Amber Alert. They might be used for checking out farmland and seeing how things are going. They might be used to look at my house during the next Fargo flood to see, where's that river going and where things. There's all sorts of things in there, and there's lots of little things in the bill that I think would be better served if all the people came to the table, studied the entire issue, and then came forth maybe next time with an issue. The other thing is the test site that the people at UND and in Grand Forks are hoping to get. It's a huge economic thing for that part of the state. It could bring in a lot of jobs and a lot of money. We heard two sets of numbers today, either 15 or 30 different groups wanting to have it, but there's only 6 test sites that are going to be given out. And they say that any semblance of state interference might deter the feds, the FAA, for giving them the upper hand in getting it. They've got the School of Aviation up at UND. They've got a number of things going for them. And so what's the big hurry? The deadline is the end of this year. Why can't you wait until 2014 to do something like this? Why does it have to be done right now? So the timing is bad. Even the people that came in opposed were saying there's good things in this bill, but the timing is bad because of this thing that they're applying to get.
Representative Becker, one of the arguments, as Senator Nelson mentioned, one of the arguments against the bill is that some of the opponents of the bill said, well, what we really need is a study of all of the elements of drone usage by law enforcement and other folks. What do you think about that argument?
Well, I'm wondering, when you ask the question, should law enforcement be required to have a search warrant to do surveillance on a private citizen? What do you need to study about that? Constitution? What are we going to study? In this circumstance, I think that the study is a means of just trying to put this on the back burner. And I'd be very interested to hear what we're going to study. Are we going to study how many times it's been misused? That may be zero. That's not the point. The point is that there is now a gray area. It's not already covered by evidence of various discussions I've had with sheriffs, whereby the question is, should it be okay to use a drone to obtain information to then take back to a judge using that information to get a full search warrant? Or is this gray area, should that be addressed by saying, you know what, this is a very important thing, we need to protect the Fourth Amendment, we need to protect privacy issues, let's get the search warrant to be able to use the drone. And that's what we're looking at. I'm not sure what we would study. It's an issue of civil liberties.
Does not the existing requirement that law enforcement get search warrants in order to, look on people's property, doesn't that already provide enough protection?
No, it doesn't. An example would be, again, in discussions with various law enforcement, currently a patrolman can drive down the street, look up your driveway, take a glance as he's driving by if you have an open window, and if there's something that attracts his attention and warrants it, he can stop and look further. The drone now has the capability of not only going down the street and looking up your driveway, but flying over your house, looking in your backyard, looking over your shoulder to see what you're reading, using various technologies, infrared, thermal imaging, all sorts of technologies to do so much more than the patrolman driving down the street. So it's entirely different.
Could you just address for a moment, some of the things you said, frankly, they are possible. A small drone can, frankly, even look in your window. But it also has a whiff of paranoia about it. Could you just address that concern?
Yep, I'd be happy to. And that's kind of that's a go-to point for some of the opponents that this is reactionary, technophobic, paranoid, black helicopter crowd is the term that's been used. And it's really not. Some of the states, like I believe Montana and Virginia, are putting forth bills that just stop drone usage altogether domestically. This bill, and my personal belief is that drones have a very important usage for so many things. And being able to use the drones for those types of things are important. The fact that we recognize that the technology is advancing very, very quickly, that law enforcement agencies all around the state are extremely excited. They're holding seminars on how to do it. This is upon us. It's a new technology. I'm not suggesting some sort of weird paranoid theories, but I'm simply saying there's now a new gray area. Let's address it.
Senator Nelson, you mentioned the economic value of northeastern North Dakota being declared an FAA unmanned aerial system study area. Even if this is true, is it, just to kind of compress things a bit, even if that's true, does it merit delaying this study because the study, or merit delaying this bill because this bill, it is argued, has fairly important privacy and constitutional protections for folks? And is it worth it to sell those out so that we can try to get a status as an FAA test site?
Well, number one, Dale, you were there for part of the hearing, and you know that Representative Becker was the only one that came in and testified in favor of this bill. We spent the rest of the hour and a half listening to the folks that, yes, maybe down the road this would be a good bill, but for now they wanted that leeway time in order to make the application and not have any semblance of the state might get in the way in order for us to accomplish what we want to do.
Do you think that his bill really represents the state getting in the way? It appears just to focus on law enforcement use of drones rather than
we had law enforcement folks. We had the folks from the university that have their act together, quite frankly. They've got a number of groups up there that have been working diligently, trying to put a situation together, trying to get protocols set up to make things work. And I think they should be given a chance to continue the work and get it done. And then, if it is a gray area, it's still going to be a gray area next session. And during the interim, we'll have plenty of time to take a look at it.
What do you see the Senate? Which approach do you see the Senate committee favoring on this bill?
I really don't know. I know there'll be a motion tomorrow to amend out all sections but Section 9, which is the one that says let's do a study.
Okay. And do you think that will have some support?
3 on a number of things. Be an interesting 8 to 9 o'clock.
Is that a approach that you personally favor? Is just having
Yes.
a study? Okay.
Yes.
Representative Becker, what do you think of that idea?
Well,
frankly, is it better than nothing?
I think it's a waste of money and time. Again, yeah, I'd like someone to tell me what they're going to study. There's nothing to study. Either this is a privacy issue, a civil liberties issue, or it's not. And if it's a civil liberties issue, we don't delay things and say, well, first let's let this grant come to us and let's ask those guys if it's convenient, if the timing is okay to protect these civil liberties. It's you either protect them or you don't.
Isn't this concern, as meritorious as it may be, isn't it fairly hypothetical at this point, though, in North Dakota, in terms of drones peeking in our windows, invading our privacy?
Well, is it hypothetical if a citizen asks their sheriff, can you use a drone to look in my backyard without a search warrant? What do they answer?
Well, I guess, one thing you could answer would be, well, I can walk by your house and look in your backyard. What's the difference?
Well, but you can't climb over the fence and peek under the bushes and peer in the windows.
I can peer in the windows. I might not be able to see as well as a drone, but I can certainly peer in the windows.
Well, if you can do everything a drone can do, then you're absolutely right.
Well, one of the things that should be addressed here is, though, these concerns are not raised with airplanes and they're not raised with helicopters. And what's the difference with a unmanned aerial system?
Well, a helicopter and an airplane need to fly at about, I believe, 1,000 feet. And a drone can hover in the curtilage of your private property, so around your home, in your backyard. And it really isn't. This bill is so non-restrictive. There's nothing paranoid. We're just saying, I'm going to take your question of saying, isn't this theoretical because there haven't been any injustices done? Yeah, we're not identifying a problem saying here's the solution. We're not even, and I don't even take the approach of this is a solution looking for a problem. I'm simply saying new technology, let's be clear that we need a search warrant.
Senator Nelson, what sort of things do you see drones being used for based upon the testimony today that have nothing to do with law enforcement that could be potentially beneficial?
Well, it was interesting because there's one section in this bill that says after 90 days, if what you took pictures of can't be used for criminal prosecution, you have to destroy them. And several people came in and said, hey, if we take some pictures, let's say of the border or of the flood, may it Minot, Bismarck, or Fargo, wherever, we don't want to have to discard them after 90 days. That's what this bill says that you need to do. There were talk about using them for agriculture. There were things using for mapping pipelines, electrical systems, those types of things. We don't know what all the possibilities are for this new type of technology. And Representative Becker says he doesn't understand what a study would do. I think a study would say, what are all the options that are out there for use of this? I've got peace friends that think that our space should be locked up and nobody should be flying them if there's any kind of a military system. But you and I both know that there's some Predator drones that are flying out of here and going to places way overseas. And those are military duties. And the military came in and testified against this bill today. So there are a lot of things we need to look at. We need to set up the protocols, and we need to have our ducks in a row before. And I agree, if you want to go after somebody that you think has got something criminal against them, get the warrant and go out and get it. I don't think there's a problem with that. It's just that it shouldn't have to be used for everything.
Were you fairly assured that the folks coming in to testify against the bill had civil liberties and personal privacy at the forefront of their minds?
I don't think so. I think they were very concerned about what the impact would be on the northeast corner of the state.
Oh, don't you think that's a little bit scary? They're coming in here and they want a project, and they don't care about personal privacy or civil liberties. They want a project.
Well, I think several of them said, part of our protocol is privacy. It has to be written in there. And the test site thing said, one of the things that's in it says privacy has to be one of the considerations along with research and space and whether we can all use the airwaves together, and all of these types of things. So I think they're very aware that there is privacy. But I think their set thing today was defending their own programs. And that's what most people who come into the legislature are doing, protecting their own interests. You know that.
That's true.
That's unfortunate.
One other thing. the speculation about what a UAS FAA test site would be worth for northeastern North Dakota, what did you think about the analysis of the folks that came in and said, boy, this is going to be a great thing? Did you think that that was realistic or maybe a bit of puffery?
No, I think they've got the new school up at UND that's a 4-year program on the use of unmanned aerial systems, and I think they're very sincere in their wishes to make that the best school there is. Just like their aviation school up there is amongst the best in the country.
Representative Becker, I mean, when you, I don't know how much of the UND testimony you listened to, but did you think that those folks were cognizant of privacy and the concerns that you have?
Well, I agree with what was said before. That's not their primary concern. The other aspect, though, about addressing retaining images, that could be handled very, very easily by simply dropping 2 words from the bill. You can make an amendment. That's the first time that was brought up to my attention. In the bill, it does say law enforcement or any state agency can't retain images. All you have to do is drop any state agency, because what we're looking at is we don't want law enforcement retaining images forever in hopes that they can go back and find something against a person where they hadn't obtained a search warrant previously.
What if they wanted to retain the images for, I don't know, something else that had nothing to do with charging someone? I mean, I imagine that they could make use of, like, images of city streets or certain terrain.
Again, we're looking at, and I don't have a problem with that. Again, first time it was brought up to me, just like other things that are currently in the bill, those are amendments that were put in when I was working with law enforcement. But it's sort of like no matter what I do to try and make it so that it's amenable to law enforcement, they'll get you to go to a certain point, and then they say, well, we still don't like it. So if you took out this any state agency, you could do all of the things that we're talking about and not have any problems. It can be used in absolutely any way except the one.
Thank you for your time. We've been talking to Representative Rick Becker, whose voice you just heard. He's a Republican from Bismarck and the sponsor of a bill that requires law enforcement to use to get a warrant before they can surveil private citizens with drones. Good evening. This is Dale Wetzel. I'm the host of the Legislature Today radio hour, actually 2 hours, and we're at the Peacock Alley American Bar and Grill in downtown Bismarck, and it's Teeny Tuesday, which means you can get 2 martinis for the price of 1, and I'm looking down at the bar and see martini glasses everywhere, so it's obviously quite popular. We're going to be speaking about Governor Jack Dalrymple's education finance bill in the second half hour of the show. This is a large and very detailed and very financially significant piece of legislation that's been a long time in the making. And the governor himself presented it to a joint hearing of the Senate Education and Finance and Taxation Committees this morning. We have with us this evening Senator Tim Flackel. He's a Republican from Fargo, and he is the chairman of the Senate Education Committee, which has the primary jurisdiction over this bill. We also have with us Senator Nicole Poolman, a Republican from Bismarck. She's a new member of the Senate, and she is a member of the Senate Education Committee. And we also have another member of the Senate Education Committee, Senator Joan Heckerman. She's a Democrat from New Rockford. She is the Assistant Senate Democratic Leader. Welcome, everyone.
Hello.
And Senator Flackel, could you just try to explain the bill as what is significant about it for students in schools and property taxpayers?
Well, I think that is a twofold bill in that it not only is designed with the hope of providing academic excellence and outcomes for students to achieve at high levels, but the other component and we've had this for a couple sessions now, is to provide significant property tax relief as part of the overall comprehensive K-12 funding mechanism, because as people know, that is really the lion's share of the property taxes, and so that's where it seems most logical to look at those replacement dollars. And again, it replaces those dollars that would normally be charged to people based upon the value of their farms and their homes and their other properties that they may have in business. So that's really in a nutshell what the bill has in it.
Have you heard any objections to the bill? Because it is a lot of money. I mean, the money's not directly in the bill, but it does involve a great deal of money. and also it involves some rather significant restructuring of the school finance formula.
Right. There's a number of moving parts to the bill, and as such, it takes a long time really for people to get your brain wrapped around it. And it's one of those situations that regardless of how much money we would put into it, I always kid people that if the first thing, the school administrators do is look down and to the left, they look at the name of their school district and then over to the right and see how much dollars they get. Now, say, for instance, if you have school district XYZ and they say, oh, I'm getting a 12% increase, that's great. And then they look at their counterpart of a similar size school district and they go, oh, but they got 15. How does that work? We don't like it as much now. So there's always those competing things that really make things interesting along the way. There's a few things that we're certainly going to have to do, as people can appreciate. There's only so much the House could do in the first half. You're limited to so many days. They had the bill for not too many days in the Policy Committee, and then it went to the Appropriations Committee. So there's only so much that really can be done during those times. And when they do make some changes, oftentimes there are some corrections needed in terms of unintended consequences that they have to shore up here or there. One of them that was is being discussed would be those related to the reservation schools that are related, near or on reservations, and how we can make them more appropriately funded. So there's a few of those types of things that will certainly be coming forward in terms of what we should do, making sure the weighting factors are correct for people, making sure that we justify the changes that the House made make sense for us. And certainly one of the big discussion points that our committee will have will be, what is the appropriate amount of mill levy buy down. As introduced in the House side, it started at 50, reduced it down to 50 mills statewide average. The House moved that up to reduce it to 70 mills, which is about $120 million difference. And then they moved those relief dollars into another bill. So we as a committee have to decide, where do we want to sit in terms of the property tax portion of that bill. So that will be one of the early things we're going to have to do, because really a lot of the other tax bills that are related to property taxes will tumble off of that as far as what they do or don't do based upon the decision that the policy committee makes.
Senator Pullman and Senator Heckman, you're both have experience in the classroom, and I want to know how you would explain this bill to folks as how it's going to improve the education that their kids get. Do you have a, because it's a large bill, it's complicated, and I'm trying to think of how you both would boil it down to someone who came up to you and said, well, what's the deal with this education bill?
Well, I think it's going to provide highly qualified teachers in the classroom and maintain a good ratio of student to teacher. I think it's going to provide funding for the materials and textbooks, technology that the schools need. I think one of the good benefits of the bill itself is the construction loan that will be available. $200 million will be available for new construction, and I think that that's important to a lot of schools in the state, because you look at a lot of the buildings around right now and they're leaning on 50 to 75 years old. And while some of the stimulus funds helped do some improvements and some energy efficiency, we're still dealing with old buildings. And I know that there are several school districts around looking at finding an avenue, and the $200 million for construction loans is very important in here. The other thing that, go back to the classroom, I think the move up in teacher salary is good, but I think it needs to continue to keep professional people in the classroom. Looking at a salary of $27,500 for a starting teacher is an interesting concept, because I just testified on a child care bill in Human Services. In Dickinson, a family with 2 children will be paying about $14,000, about $16,800 a year for child care for those 2 children. $750 for the first one, $650 for the second child. And if you average that out in 9 months, that's about $12,000 a year for child care if you have 2 children and you want to teach. We will have single parents out there teaching, whether they're men or women. We're going to have some single parents out there that are teaching. So to keep good quality teachers, I think we need to keep that pay at least the state average, which is $32,000. And so that's a move that I think would be important for quality education.
Senator Pullman, how do you explain this bill to anyone who might ask you about it?
Well, I ran on two major ideas when I decided to run for office. I want our kids to go to good quality schools, and I wanted to make sure that our constituents saw really solid property tax relief. And so I talk about this bill as being the bill that I want to support and really go to bat for, because this provides both. It continues to provide equity for students no matter where they are going to school. It provides significant, noticeable, and sustainable property tax relief to people. And I really think that it still offers school districts the flexibility that they will need to meet the needs of their individual districts and their students.
Do you have any particular complaints about the bill or ways you would improve it?
Well, I am still, like many people, trying to wrap my head around the whole bill. We just had the hearing this morning and still trying to get a hold of the moving parts and the pieces that changed in the House. And so I am not going to be too nitpicky yet until I really understand the complexity of the bill.
Now, one of the things I've heard is that Governor Dalrymple presented the bill because he's the only one who understands it. Senator Flacco, what do you think about what Senator Heckman mentioned about, specifically about minimum teacher salaries? Is that, I mean, right now I believe the minimum salary is $22,000. This bill would move it up to $27,500, and there's been an appeal to move it actually further to $32,000 per year.
As would be expected. You know, certainly the teacher organization would like to see a higher number. We've increased it with this bill, if we were to pass the bill as it is, approximately 22%. Originally, when we passed the legislation in the 2005 session, I believe, we've increased it now 65%, because then the lowest paid was $16,500. And we really heard about that outlier. So during that session, we decided that there should be minimums established as we were moving a lot of money into that. But, you know, there's that fine balance between local control of the school board and what the state should be involved in. One of the things we have to look to is at the ripple effect. We know that there's right now there's a limited number of school districts that the bill as it came to us would affect. I think it's 9 districts and maybe 100 teachers. But as we were moving to the $32,000, I believe it was 2,332 teachers approximately, of which that's kind of where it starts, and there could be some ripple effect, because traditionally for every dollar you put at the bottom end, there's $1.70 to $2.10 at the top end. So we want to make sure that the school districts really have their say in it too, and we can't force them too much to do things beyond their means either.
And would I think this is what you're referring to, but would a too large increase in the minimum salary essentially create a salary schedule problem for some school districts?
Well, you know, it would depend upon how much compression there is associated with that. I think the top end we heard about today was starting salary of $43,000, I think, that we find across the districts. And in some cases, in some of these communities, and we didn't hear it during testimony today, but when we've heard about it over the years, is that in some cases they were paid X amount, but they were the kind of the highest paid person in their community at that time. Now, we're not hearing that we're this point yet, but we take those things into consideration. But really, some of it comes down to how much do we wish to encroach on the locals' ability to decide what's best for their school district.
I want to ask this question of all three of you, and I'll start with you, Senator Heckman. What about the hearing today? What is it that you heard that you thought was some of the most impressive stuff that you heard regarding this bill and what its effects will be on schools?
Well, I agree with Senator Pullman that it's something we really have to spend some time on. I heard from some administrators the fact that they're not sure how much of a property tax buy-down this is really going to be. Now, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, we have to put that in perspective, because when we look at this and the House raised it to 70 mills, that makes a significant difference. Like Senator Flacco said, it's $120-some million difference. Some schools are at 110 mills right now, and through this bill, I think they'll be able to go to about 95. That won't be much of a decrease for property tax owners. So I wouldn't think it's the most important thing, but I think it's a very significant thing for all of the schools out there to consider. Where are they now in their levy, and where will this take them in their levy, and how much actual dollar amount will we see? The difference when you look at what per student payment is this year compared to what next year is, there's about a $4,400 difference or somewhere in there. But property tax owners aren't going to see all that. That's the difference right now. And they're going to have to rely still on local property tax and other means of funding that they have on their local system first, and then the state will fill in with the rest of that.
Senator Poolman, frankly, one of the things I think about when I'm sitting through these hearings is I look at the legislators and I'm thinking, okay, what is it that all these people are saying that is registering with the people on the committee? What is it that was said today that particularly registered with you in terms of its significance?
Well, I am impressed with the piece that allows for construction loans as well, because I see that not only as a part of the bill that is allowing us to alleviate current property taxes, I see that as a way for us to ensure that property taxes don't go up in the future as well. On many of these school districts who see extreme needs for buildings, it's a nice way for them to be able to meet those needs without increasing property taxes on their citizens. So that's one piece today that stuck out to me. Senator
Flacco, you've got quite a bit of background here, and so I don't know if anything really struck you, but did anything really strike you?
Yeah, I think people can appreciate that. Much like yourself, there's things we've heard a number of times over, but I think certainly the salient points that a lot of people would be interested in is really the tax relief portion of it. That really has a mass appeal to people. There's the fact that as it stands now, the state would pay maybe about 80% of the cost of education in schools, which, to be honest, scares some schools because, that's a pretty big amount. And I was kidding one of my friends, Dr. Stremick, today that, we kind of give them what they've been asking for
they're the dog.
tens of many years, now. We want this, we want this, we want this. Now it's like like I said, the dog that caught the bus. Now what do we do with it? But yes. I'm going to steal something here if I could, Dale. That we wrote up that for the presentation. But really, what I think is an important consideration is the goal is for every student in North Dakota to have access to an equal and established base of financial support to provide a solid education, regardless of where the student lives or how much taxable property is available. And that's really kind of one of the underlying tenets that we're all going to look at. Certainly some are going to have different amounts of dollars locally, but we're trying to really make that really handed out fairly, and we're basing it upon the the PICA study that says it takes about so many dollars to properly educate a child that they can succeed very well. We put in a lot of weighting factors, which we'll probably talk about too during our discussion to make sure that those are still relevant. Because when we go from a payment of about $4,000 up to a payment of over $9,000, sometimes those weighting factors need to be reviewed. But in terms of academic excellence, one of the reasons why we've been able to do well and what we need to continue to look at are providing the necessary resources for special education students, English language learner students, those that really struggle with the language, the at-risk population. So those safety nets are put into place to make sure that students succeed with a variety of different challenges.
Can you explain to us what are weighting factors? It was a term you used.
Well, weighting factors are, as an example, English language learners. If you have a challenge with the English language, maybe you're a new American or refugee from a country, there's a test that's given, and then they categorize them into 3 different levels. The most severe receives a additional weight of 30%. So if we were to take the funding formula and say we're giving out a $9,000 per child, you multiply that times 30%, they would get an additional $3,000 to help ensure that child receives the additional support, whether it's tutoring, mentoring, or whatever they need to keep up with their classmates.
It's meant, in other words, to compensate for additional expenses for certain categories of students.
Right, and to really kind of represent the true cost of those whenever possible.
Senator Heckerman, I was interested in what your opinion was, and all 3 of you actually, about the impact of this on local control, which Senator Flacco alluded to. I mean, it's wonderful that property taxes are way down in school districts, but that is how school boards get money to do things that they think that their patrons want. And are they so limited by this bill that they're not going to be able to do that?
Well, that's one of the things I heard actually after the hearing was over, and I have some superintendents that are mulling over some ideas to present on their behalf. They're limited in some ways to 12% over the mill levy that will be set by this bill. And they're concerned about that because they say, what happens if our expenses go up? What happens if this gets really high? What happens if electricity goes really high? What happens if something breaks down and we don't have enough funds in our building fund? So there's a lot of ifs out there right now, and I think Senator Flacco and Senator Pullman both talked about that. We'll have to work those through. If they have any suggestions, I think, as a committee, we're a small committee, and so we can consider those easier than probably a larger committee would. Those are some of the things that they're concerned about. When they look at that 12% or that local option too, they're also concerned about what that will do with their local levies and what it will provide in property tax relief. Are their patrons actually going to see property tax relief? And so, we have a lot of questions, probably more than we do answers. The other important thing about this bill is it's basically a 2-year bill. When this was designed, I appreciate all the work that went into this because there was a lot of work that went into this. It's basically going to have a sunset on it, and we'll have to consider it again coming up. And in doing so, there's also some funding in there for a study. And so we'll be able to study how this funding mechanism works if it's passed in its entirety.
Senator Pullman, is it a concern of yours that this bill, although it does accomplish the objective of driving down the property tax for schools, on the other hand, it restricts what a school board can do and how it can raise money? Is that a concern?
When it comes to local control, I think that we have to look at the fact that we're already funding a large portion of school districts already, and they haven't lost local control. They can still teach as they want to teach and implement programs as they wish. I don't anticipate that just because we are buying down more mills that would change. I don't think local control will be lost with this. I just think that it is giving them a higher share of the funding and lowering property taxes for people.
Senator Flacco, I mean, you alluded to this earlier, but is this a serious matter in terms of potential loss of local control? And frankly, another way of looking at it is school boards have limited local control anyway. I mean, we talk a lot about local control, but there's a lot of things that school boards are mandated to do.
Well, there's a big difference between having a corporation where you own 49% and going to 51% where, it's like somebody said, with George Steinbrenner, there's nothing more minority than being a minority owner with George Steinbrenner because he runs the show. But in this case, I think we do, and I can only echo what Senator Pullman said. When we go from 70% to 80%, I don't believe that will change us. As much as I like to give Bev Nielsen, who was with the School Administrators Association about, we do, have a controlling authority now on things, but we have to really be careful so we do rein that in. And we've done a number of things this session, whether it's curriculum that was, asked to be mandated in a few different areas or other things. So we have to monitor that. One of the other things you kind of asked about too was the flexibility, and we've really started to bundle up categories of mills, so that will help. And they also still have the flexibility with ending fund balances. Right now, they're at about 22% of their cost of operations and ending fund balance, which is probably about $280 million. So the schools do have some resources, hopefully in the event that they do need some assistance in one way or another, whether it's a storm damage or something like that. But and the one thing I really want to get, and I know you didn't ask me this, Dale, but I want to, it's one of those you're going to hear no matter
Absolutely.
What question you ask me sometime tonight.
Let's hear it.
Okay. Is mills confuse the heck out of people? What's a mill? I don't think, there would be 50 people in the state who could, explain it in a really concise manner. I think the easiest way that I've used to describe this is, is kind of what we're looking at, generally speaking, is for every $10,000 of value, like on your house or your property, for every $10,000, you would save $60. So if you have a $100,000 house, you save $600 per year. If you have a $200,000 house, you save $1,200 per year. So on average, it'll be $1,000. So it's a really kind of an easy way to say, well, the true and full value of my house is $120,000. Okay, so then that's $720. So that's really a much better way than to say this many mills, this many mills. When people start talking that, you just look at people's eyes glaze over and roll in the back of their head.
I think one of the differences too is that a mill even across my district varies in each school district. I mean, I have mills that are $9,000 per mill, and I have other districts that are $19,000 per mill, and you go to Fargo and it's $400 and some $1,000 per mill probably. So, a mill means different to different school districts, and that's important when you talk about a mill. It doesn't mean the same thing in every district. So,
Senator Pullman, do you understand mills?
Do I understand mills? I am just starting to understand mills.
It's difficult. I mean, it's a difficult thing. Anyway, with that,
the Mills brothers, maybe.
Yes, of course, the Mills coffee or something like that. We've been speaking this evening to Senator Tim Flacco, who is the chairman of the Senate Education Committee. He's a Republican from Fargo. We've also been speaking to Senator Joan Heckerman, a Democrat from New Rockford. She's the Assistant Senate Democratic Leader. And also we've had with us Senator Nicole Pullman, a new Republican member of the North Dakota Senate from Bismarck. Senator Heckman, Senator Pullman, and Senator Flacco are all members of the Senate Education Committee, which has been looking at the governor's new education bill. Thank you very much for your time.
Just as a warning, if you'd had one more of us, you'd have had a quorum.
The Legislature today is brought to you in part by Prairie Outpost Log Homes, your custom lifestyle